said back in the day, your father worked with a lot of publishers that were old school gangsters. What did he ever speak about the gangsterism that was going on in the music industry at that time?
Yeah. Um, Morris Levy was a big time gangster. The Gale brothers were kind of they were like nice gangsters.
Nice gangsters, you
Yeah, they weren't. They were. You know, he never said that they tried to. They never tried to be thuggish with him, and neither did Morris Levy. He said Morris always paid him his money, but my father went up there with a henchman too, who was a Korean War vet, 82nd Airborne. You know, and he was ready. You know, was ready for some work like that.
So your father always had his guy with.
Yeah, my father hired him and some other guys. They were, you know, they were rough. If my father had problems with money, you know, now he should have really come after E.B. Marks like that too. But I think the stress of my mother dying, losing his house, you know, he didn't think that they would do something like that to him, number one. You know, because they were on a different standard. So he didn't think that. See, usually the ones on a certain standard, you're not going to roll like that. It's the ones that are in that, like the real thug type of, the George Goldners, the Morris Levy's, those type of people, you know, you go with your boys, your henchmen. And they came in there, and you knew what they were there for, to make sure, you know. And sometimes he'd send them to pick the money up.
He wouldn't even go.
He wouldn't even go.
He just sent the hitters.
The hitters.
To get the money.
Yeah, and they go, yes, no problem. You know, you want to count it first? Let's tear it open. Count it. It's all there, and no problem.
So these were some serious men.
Back in those days. I mean, you know, I told you the sophisticated thing, you know, with the getting the number one, putting all those DJs down.
Yeah.
But, you know, everyone has a breaking point. So when Congress started investigating payola, you know, now the feds are involved. So now, you know, everyone was afraid of the feds.
Of course.
Everyone buckled when the feds came. Everyone buckled on the feds.
They have endless resources.
That's right. But state, whatever, get the out of here, man. Get that, you know. So, yeah, they're not worried about anything but the feds. So that kind of calmed my father down.
Did he have any issues with the gangsters trying to extort him in any way, shape, or form?
Well, the ones who would do that would be like the Morris Levys, in indirect ways. But like I said, you know, my father realized he had to get a posse too.
So is it important for him to have that, for lack of a better word, army to make sure everything was balanced?
Well, you know, especially when you're trying to do your own thing, you got your own label. Now you got to pick up your own money. You say, so if someone's going to act as a one-stop distributor for you, you know, for a certain length of time, you want to be able to collect. So maybe Morris Levy put himself, because they're doing multiple things now. They're not just, you know, they're using their resources okay, I'll let your record tag on to mine. We're shipping some out to Chicago, whatever. So we'll take some of yours. How many do you want us to take for you? You know, and take 1,000, whatever. Sign an agreement. This is the money I expect. Boom, boom, boom. So everyone everyone is acting as a co-op. You know, a cooperative.
Cut the cost.
Yeah.
Now, when you say they tried to extort him indirectly, what do you mean?
Like, you're doing business with so-and-so? Like, come on, I thought you I thought it's me and you. Like, what are you doing? Like, you know, you want to have problems? Like what? You must be asking for trouble. Oh, you must be looking for trouble. You must be looking for trouble. Yeah, that would be like an insinuation of sorts.
A very indirect threat.
Yeah. you must be looking for trouble. So there were like indirect, I think George Gollner kind of like, well, an extortion is, you know, you're going to use me even if my costs are up and you got a better deal, you're going to still use me or else.
Mm-hmm.
Or I'm going to make trouble for you, so you're going to pay me so you won't have trouble. So therefore, I'm not directly saying that I'm going to make the trouble, but there's going to be trouble, and you're going to pay me, and I'm going to keep the trouble from happening.
Yes.
So these are like forms of extortion. And I'm sure that there were, you know, I mean, variations of it. Some were mild forms and some were maybe like middle. But my father, you know, could push back or not worry about, you know. And they might have made good in a way of like, you know, hindering his product, but not to try to destroy his product, intercept his product and throw his records in the river. I don't think there were cases like that.
Okay.
There could have been. Something got lost. You know, like somebody, you know, I had the car door open and, you know, like someone just grabbed the records, Dixon, you know, come on.
Yeah.
And somebody just hit the person with like, you know, how much is Dixon paying you? Okay, here goes, you know, we taking these records. And this is what you say. I mean, there could have been situations like that.
At that time, were there any black gangsters he could go to for protection that was around, like the Bumpy Johnsons or?
Bumpy was into numbers. So the answer is, you know, people stayed in their lane. So Bumpy wasn't into music.
Gotcha.
So, but there were people that, like I said, you know, they have a reputation for straightening things out. And so their muscle would be for hire. But no well-known gangsters, black, in the music industry. You know, white, yes, but like I said, Morris Levy, George Gollner. So their ties would be to, like they may have had mafia ties. Maybe the Gale brothers too. But, you know, there was the Jewish mafia. So they you know, they'll do business together, but the Jews had their own gangsterism in the music industry. So the mafia usually didn't cross, but they could be, you know, maybe Frank Sinatra. So they got control of venues, you know, so they have venues where people would perform. And so you're going to perform at my venue 12 times a year. You know, so once you get into bed, Now they expect you, next year, I got you booked for 15 performances. You could be having a heart attack. You know, how you feeling? All right, so just a week, you know, you'll be ready. Remember, you got 15 shows. So the mafia was involved in venues, more so.
So it's no real strong arming. It was a subtle.
Oh no.
Okay.
They, they could have certain artists, like if because back in those days things were kind of separate. So the record label wasn't the umbrella for everything, like it is now. You sign a record deal now with somebody, you know, you're tied into performances and everything. So it's back then things were separated. So you had booking agencies, and so you know you would deal with getting your own work in that way. You're not connected to the record label in that way.
Mm-hmm.
So you would have to make money doing performances. So you would have a manager or an agent get you work. So your manager, you know, he's the only person getting paid for everything. You know, like your manager manages you for everything. So you're paying your manager. Your agent, you know, gets you booked and you pay the agent. The record label would have nothing to do with that. So in that regard, you could get mixed up with some type of, you know,
criminal organization.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's controlling that aspect, and somehow you sign something. Jews had their booking agencies too, but yeah, the record labels were kind of free from mafia control. But the mafia did try to break in.
Mm.
But they, so the independent label, you know, was kind of vulnerable. And so that's why they had to have their hitmen.
Muscle for hire.
Yeah, to protect my product. I got to move my product from point A to B. Someone may try to intercept it.
Good information.
Yeah, those are the old days.
Yeah, it's still the new days now.
And, you know, greasing DJs' palms to play records.
Payola, yes.
They were doing that big time.
Yeah.
It started in the 50s.
Payola.
Yeah. And my father, actually, those same DJs eventually became organized in a way that was legitimate.
The payola was legitimate.
Well, no, no. They still stayed organized, and they became known as NARA, the National Association of Radio Artists. Then they became NATRA. They started including television and radio. NATRA. And they lasted until the 70s, and one of the DJs continued being out there, you know, with conventions and so forth, and that was Jack the Rapper.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I remember Jack.
So Jack, the family affair,
Yeah.
and he and my father, you know, he was part of the co-op music. And they had a falling out over that, actually. And when Jack became very instrumental in, you know, black radio and black record labels, you know, it was the fact that my father and he were not close. That kind of hurt my father. And one of the other DJs, my father considered him his best friend, Larry Dean. They called him Mean Lean, Larry Dean. And Larry had invited my father and Jack over for dinner. They didn't know that each of them didn't know
that they were coming.
Yeah, my father didn't know the other one was coming, and Jack didn't know. And so now they're like, they're feeling very funny about being in the same room together. And then Larry grabbed my father's hand, and he grabbed Jack's hand, and he put them together. And he said, "Cut this foolishness out. Y'all let good years go by." I mean, years where the two of them together could have been more powerful.
Yeah.
And they let good years go by. So I met Jack in person in 1990. They had one convention, and they didn't have sponsorship. That's the only thing they didn't have. They didn't have sponsorship. But they had, panels and things like that, And so they kind of like laid the blueprint.
The co-op.
Co-op music. That was the first one where it was industry driven.
So they pretty much had a monopoly.
They could have. They did for this 1 year.
On the East Coast.
No, they went as far as from Chicago, Detroit, so all that area.
So pretty much where there was a huge black populace, he had a DJ at each one of those markets.
Yeah, Louisville, Detroit, Cincinnati, Philadelphia, DC, Baltimore, Richmond, Miami, all the main spots.
All the main hubs.
All the main hubs.
Hit them all.
They could have been getting, but the payola thing had them real scared.
Yeah. And your father was sitting at the head of the table.
Well, he was the president of Co-op Music.
Okay.
But the falling out actually was that they were all expecting their payout. And they said, a group of them said, whoever doesn't show up to this meeting, they don't get paid. And my father, he was, they voted on it. And Jack and Eddie Castleberry didn't show up. And so they went to my father, "Where's my money?" And my father was telling them, they had a vote that no one could get paid. I had nothing to do with it. But if the money is coming through him,
right,
then he could have still
hit him off with something.
He should have done that, even if it meant him taking a loss.
Keep him happy.
Keep him happy, because he's getting paid as the writer. He's getting paid as the record label. See? So that was a bad business move on his part.
And the co-op disbanded after a year, you say?
Yeah. After the payola investigation.
So they were investigated directly by the FBI?
Well, Congress. But Congress has subpoena power. And all that. Congress, they had FBI resources. But they also had, so they subpoenaed Dick Clark.
Wow.
And my father was directly hooked up with Dick Clark, because Dick Clark was the distributor of the record. See? So they told Dick Clark he had to choose between the records and television. What's it going to be, Mr. Clark? You can't do both. Because he had radio, he had television, he had publishing, he had records, distribution.
total monopoly.
Yeah.
Because he controlled the whole supply chain from production to.
Well, just because, I mean, not, he was a monopoler. I don't think that he was just one of a few doing that.
Mhm.
Now they let him do it again. That you could go back to doing that now, because they think that it's so diversified that you can't. But back then, they made these laws, and he chose television.
He chose television to avoid being prosecuted.
They would have dismantled his whole thing.
Oh, so he got hit up with an antitrust case then, and they were going to separate all the companies.
Yeah.
Like Dick Clark Productions or whatever.
Yes. So it just had to be television. Couldn't do, I guess maybe he could still do the radio, but he couldn't do records, distribution. He couldn't do that.